Hi guys, Alex here, and welcome to episode 56 of the Trademate Sports Betting Podcast. Today I'm joined by a computer scientist and also the author of Calculated Bets, Stephen Skinner. How are you, mate? Welcome to the podcast.
Very good. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here.
You've already got the book out. That's great, mate. Mate, obviously, yeah, like I said, computer scientist, but I think, what we'll be talking about more so today is your book, which I'll give a brief description of, is basically tells the story of how you use computer simulations and mathematical modeling techniques to predict the outcome of highlight matches. I hope I've pronounced that all right.
Highlight, yes.
And bet on them successfully. I mean, I'm sure most of our listeners have probably never heard of highlight before. Can you kind of explain the sport of highlight
So
as
highlight
best
is
as
a very
possible?
interesting sport, actually, of Basque origin. It comes from the Basque region in Spain, and became a pari-mutuel betting sport in Florida and Connecticut during, starting in about the 1970s in the United States. Highlight is a kind of a variation on handball. They had a very hard ball called the pelota. The players would go back and forth trying to catch it and throw it against a hard wall using this basket called a cesta. And basically, when you were betting on a highlight match in the United States, there would be 8 teams playing at the same time. Playing in a kind of round robin fashion. Two teams playing against each other on any given point. And the goal, as a pari-mutuel sport, your goal was to try to predict who would win. You could bet on who would win. You could bet on combinations of first, second, and third. Trifectas. You could bet on certain pairs of which teams would come in first and second, called quinellas. And basically, it was a pari-mutuel betting sport that was a lot of fun to watch. And again, if you ever have the opportunity to watch a highlight match, I think it's actually quite interesting athletically. It's still played in Florida. There's a fronton in Dania, Florida, which is near Fort Lauderdale, and there's also a Miami highlight. And if you're ever in the Basque region in Spain, that's actually the place to probably see the best highlight in the world. And that's actually a very interesting trip to visit a fronton out there.
Yeah, so you got Spain and the US. They're the only places it's going on at the moment.
As far as I can know, again, the United history of highlight is actually quite interesting. During the in the 1960s, let's say, there was nothing you could bet on in the United States, basically, except horse racing. It was pari-mutuel. This was before lotteries were even really allowed. And highlight came in the 1970s as another pari-mutuel sport, like horse racing. And it became very, very popular for a while, for many years. But ran kind of has faded pretty dramatically because of competition from casino gambling. So there is a lot less, so the frontons, for a while you could bet in Connecticut and Rhode Island, and those frontons closed. There were, more frontons in Florida. 2 of them are still creeping along, but largely because of the support of, they have casino gambling along with the fronton. So it's, I think it's a wonderful sport. And if you get a chance to watch a highlight match, it's a very exciting thing. But unfortunately, highlight is not as big a thing as it was, even 20 years ago.
Yeah, and before we get into your book and how like your algorithm works, the easiest way I can kind of dumb it down, I guess, is highlight, because I imagine not many people have watched it that are listening. Would you say it's like pretty similar to, I just think of it as squash, but on a really big court and maybe a little bit slower, like, it's not always hitting it back and forth.
Right. Well, I would say, yeah, again, I would have said handball. Squash is a similar kind of a thing. The differences are, one, the court is enormous. Okay. And that's necessary because the ball travels so fast. When you have them playing off of a rock hard granite wall is what you're hitting the ball off of. The ball is like a rock, and it really flies off. And when you've got a a basket, the leverage you would get from the distance, the ball would travel 180 miles an hour or something like this.
It's insane.
And, so it was, and, you would have to, it's quite interesting to watch. Actually, there's one other fronton that's an amateur fronton in Connecticut still. But for wagering, I think the only places where you can wager on it now, in the United States is at Dania or at Miami.
Yeah, I watched a video that was, I think it was a news channel in Miami maybe, and they recently said that Highlight's kind of success hinges on the money that is gambled. Would you say that's true? And like, if you were going to try and bet on Highlight these days, is it all kind of in person, or would you actually be able to do it online at any bookmaker?
When we'll talk about my game, it's not really something you would do at a bookmaker. Okay. It's the kind of a thing that when we were doing our gambling system, there was the fronton. It's kind of, again, run by an individual stadium or fronton. They're kind of independent entities. The fronton had a auto trading system. We had to actually dial in our bets, okay, back in those days. And I don't know to what extent you can bet, let's say, over the internet or something like that on these things now. I imagine most of the, again, it's a lot smaller than it used to be. I imagine most of the action is, actually at the fronton. Although I do believe there's some remote trading at other casinos and things like that. So there are sports books, I guess, where you can bet on other events. I know at times Highlight was available at these.
Okay. All right, mate. And then so let's talk about the algorithm that you produced, or the model, whatever you want to call it. How do you want to just give me like a brief explanation of how it worked?
So what made Highlight very interesting as a betting sport was the scoring system. That again, you had 8 teams that were playing simultaneously. But only 2 teams would play at the same time. So any match had 8 games, 8 teams. You had 2 teams playing at a time. They kind of started out in an order from 1 to 8. Maybe they're based on their uniform number, and then the winner would keep playing. The loser would go to the end of the line, and the first team to accumulate 7 points was the winner. And if you think about that a little bit, it pays to start with a uniform number that is 1 or 2 instead of a uniform number like 8, because you get the first crack at playing. If your goal is to get 7 points fastest, well, the quicker you can get on the court, the better off you are. Even if you lose relatively quickly, you'll get another crack at it pretty quickly. So the ordering of the teams in the queue made a big difference in the outcome. And there was one other tweak to the scoring system, which was after the first trip through the queue, all the points would count double. Okay, so let's say if you were team 8, if you won your first point against whoever you were playing, by the time you finally got on the court, you would get 1 point. If you then won the next point, you would get 2 more. That would mean your total was 3. And so in some sense, if team 8 started by winning 4 points in a row, it would win. Where team 1, they had an advantage. They got out there first. They would have to win their first 7 points to immediately win. Okay? So they tried to balance out the advantages for this with this kind of complicated, spectacular 7 scoring system. But the real result was it created substantial biases in what kind of combinations were likely to come out. So you can kind of imagine the scoring system would try to correct who would come in first, to try to make the post positions roughly equal to win. But you're allowed to bet on who came in first, second, and third. It's extremely hard for the combination 6, 7, 8 to come in, because 6 would have to kind of win a lot of points. But to do that, it would have to beat 7. But 7 has to get a lot of points to come in second. And 7 would have to beat 8, but in order for 7 to beat 8, 8 still has to get a lot of points. So certain combinations were far more likely to come out, even if you assume the players were equally skilled. Certain combinations come out 1,000 times more often than other ones. And so this seemed like the kind of thing you could build a betting system around. And so basically we came up with a model to kind of evaluate how good each team was, okay, based on how they had performed in the past. And then based on this, we kind of would simulate each game. We simulated each game 1,000,000 times. And we could see how often each triple came out. And now, again, the bets that our system liked the most were these triple bets, these trifecta bets, because they, again, certain combinations would come out 1,000 times more often than others. When you factor in player skills, different things would happen. And so our model would basically determine which were the best trifecta bets to make. We would also predict what the expected payoff was for each one of these bets. Again, this was like horse racing. It's easy to predict maybe, which horse is more likely to win. But the real question is, if all the other bettors agree that this horse is going to win, your payoff is going to be very, very low, even if you're right. And so the system also had to build a model of trying to predict what would the public be betting on in this match. And our goal was to try to find trifectas that the public would be unlikely to bet on, that we thought had a greater than expected value chance of what was coming in. And so when we identified the best trifecta bets, those were the ones we would want our system to bet on. And, because we were living in kind of ancient days, we developed a kind of Rube Goldberg type device to phone in our bets to the Connecticut Autotote system. We programmed a computer modem to kind of talk to their voice response system and pretend that it was punching buttons on a telephone keyboard, typing in our bets. And the net result was a completely automated system for betting on highlight. Every day at night, it would go look on the internet of who was going to be playing the next day, what teams. It would compute their records. It would simulate each match 1,000,000 times, identify the best bets, identify the probabilities of success of each trifecta, what was the quality of the trifecta. And also it would calculate how much money we could afford to bet on this, because again, the betting pools were relatively small. Because it was a pari-mutuel system, there was a definite limit to how much money the pool could absorb before we were essentially betting against ourselves. And
so the odds weren't fixed at all.
What?
The odds weren't fixed at all.
No, this was a pari-mutuel system. So it was not, again, in a pari-mutuel wagering. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that. This is what they do in horse racing.
Yeah.
What would happen is that when you go to a racetrack, you bet on one of the particular horses, and the house will keep 20% of all the money that is bet, and then the remaining 80% would be divided among the winners. So you had, in order to know whether a bet was profitable, you need to know not only what was the probability of that horse winning, but what would be the odds. And when you bet on horse racing, you don't know what your payoff is until after the match, because it depends ultimately upon not what the odds were when you bet, but what were the odds at the end of the betting period.
Was it quite difficult then calculating a staking size then for something? I mean, just for an example, maybe a selection that you really thought was a very high probability of happening, but the odds weren't suggesting that. Was it hard to make? Like, is it hard to judge a kind of stake size for something like that? When if you go too hard, it could completely move the market and ruin your chance of getting good odds.
So again, if what we hoped were, again, the betting pools in a highlight were when we were betting you probably had about, perhaps a few thousand people betting. So the betting pools were not that incredibly large. We were betting on these trifectas, which were relatively rare events. We kind of wanted to bet on trifectas that were rare enough that there would probably not be a lot of people betting on it. Because even if one other person bet on our trifecta, that would cut our pool in half. Okay, that would cut our payoff in half. And basically, from looking at past performance of what people bet on, okay, we built a model that did a reasonably good job of estimating the payoffs. Again, sometimes we were disappointed that we would win a trifecta and somebody else had also bet on it and our payoff was lower. Okay, but we did a good enough job to to clear money on the operation. So it was an interesting modeling challenge to try to predict these kind of things.
No, mate, it's quite fascinating, your explanation of the model there. It's very, very interesting. How relevant is it today, though? I mean, compared to 20 years ago, do you bet on highlight much nowadays?
So again, I am in New York. Highlight, when it was in Connecticut, was something that was when you had frontons in Milford and other cities in Connecticut. This was a lot more accessible to me. So these days to bet, I would have to visit Florida, and when I visit Florida, if I can, I like to visit a fronton. But the interesting thing about the book, or I guess the following of the book, largely came from people in the hedge fund world. It's actually kind of interesting. The pool of highlight bettors was not enormous. Okay, it's certainly not serious highlight bettors. So it wasn't like I was going to get it. But on the other hand, this idea of building a model to make predictions as to whether a bet is good or not, okay, is exactly what people who work in hedge funds on stocks do. And the book developed actually quite a following among people in the hedge fund community, because it was kind of good at explaining to, non-technical people how these systems work. I mean, the kind of issues I was worrying about here were exactly the same kind of issues that you would be worrying about in any kind of stock trading system. How do you predict what the probability of certain movements are? What would be the expected profit from such a movement? Okay, what is going to be my impact of my trades on the expected payoffs, on the prices of the stocks? So kind of as a sort of a model for how you build these kind of predictive systems. That was something that was where the book got to be quite popular, because again, it's written to be read by the average layman, and so you don't have to be a rocket scientist to read this, but you get an honest feeling for how these kind of systems are built. And so I would say the biggest relevance of the book was there. As far as the relevance of these kind of ideas, again, we were using a Monte Carlo simulation approach, a simulation approach based on random numbers. And these kind of simulations are very commonplace and very important to try to understand. Right now we have the election coming up, and everybody's worried about what's the probability of, let's say, some complicated event like which party is going to control the United States Senate. These are complicated predictions, but the way that these predictions are made, at least on my favorite modeling sites, are typically by these Monte Carlo simulations, by randomly playing an election, play it randomly, 100,000 times, and then see what happens. How often did one party win over those 100,000 simulations? And these are good for not only giving you a sense of who's going to win, but how confident you are about something like that. And so I think that the approach we use is a good approach for a lot of mathematical modeling problems. We relied a lot on the special kind of structure of the scoring system in Highlight. So it's a little bit hard to directly apply this to something like horse racing, or to apply this to something like football betting, which doesn't have these kind of discrete events that are happening in a regular way. But anyway, but I think it's an interesting thing to understand how modeling is done, and
Yeah.
also it's important to understand how hard it is. So one thing that when you're trying to, make bets, one thing was we had to work amazingly hard to build a successful system in highlight. I kind of thought, oh my God, the people who attend highlight matches are idiots. We're going to have no trouble being smarter than them. And it took a lot of work till we were able to build a successful system. This is not, gambling is not an easy way to make money if you're really trying to be going to be doing it in a reasonable way. So it's a hard way to make easy money, and that I think is something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Do people, I mean, you mentioned that you're in New York now, and obviously it's very hard for you to get to a match and bet on it. Do people approach you from other states like Florida and ask you if they could have a go at your model or try and buy it from you or something like that?
There were some interesting communications with people over the years. One of the more interesting events was actually that I took a year in Hong Kong. I'm a professor at a university. I get a sabbatical year. And one year I was on sabbatical in Hong Kong. And there they have some large, well-organized kind of betting syndicates in horse racing. Horse racing is very big in in Hong Kong. And for a long time, the bettors there were really terrible. They would bet on by lucking numbers rather than how good the horse was. And so these betting syndicates, which would build models predicting these kind of things and make large scale bets, became very, very profitable. And while I was in Hong Kong, got in contact with a fan of the book who worked for one of these syndicates. And so I spent a couple days hanging around these people, trying to see how their world worked. And then again, they were essentially a hedge fund trading on, on horses, okay, instead of stocks. And again, after you go through that, you realize that, again, to do this right requires a great deal of sophistication. And, it's okay to do things for fun, but if you're trying to do this right, there's a great deal of sophistication involved with that.
Yeah. How was your work looked upon when your book first came out? Because I'd assume that modeling or modeling sports betting especially would be something that maybe people were quite skeptical about.
Well, I would say that when we started doing this was near the beginning of, I would say, the hedge fund era. Okay, so the quants that were trading on stocks, I would say this was relatively near the beginning of that era. And these people, had to go through a certain amount of, had to prove their merit before they would really be able to take over Wall Street, compared to people who said, oh, I know what a good stock is, or trade it, based on other kinds of things. So, that was, I guess, it was fun to be part of that kind of beginning of a quantitative, data-driven, wave. Okay, and that hit finance, that certainly has hit sports betting, even fantasy sports betting. There are models that do, I will say, are probably the more, that are very successful, that are capture a lot of the purses in kind of fantasy football and all these other kinds of betting things. So that was it. Part of it, remember, is also I have an honest job, a day job. I'm a professor at a university. I teach algorithms and data science, and which I think are great topics to learn about. And if you want my honest books, I also have honest books on data science and algorithms, which I encourage people to read. Okay, if you want to learn how to do these kinds of modeling in a more technical way. But if within my community, which of course were the college professors, the highlight thing was quite a weird thing. Professors weren't supposed to build bookmaking operations running out of their offices and stuff like that. And that was ultimately the reason the system kind of got down. It was kind of as an experiment. Okay, it was an interesting experiment. I could prove that I could do it. And that's why I then wrote the book to explain how to do it. Once I explained how to do it, presumably there would be other people betting in similar ways, and any advantage I have over the pool would go away. So that was kind of the other reaction. It was kind of an interesting thing to do within a university, and my colleagues thought I was a little bit weird. They may still think I'm a little bit weird, but it was actually a lot of fun, and I very much enjoyed my highlight experience.
Yeah, no, of course, mate. Over the first year, you said that you increased your staking by 544%. Can you explain why you increased the staking? Was it more like at the start?
That was actually, I increased my stake. That was my winnings. I took my original betting stake. Again, we're not really dealing with massive numbers because, again, the highlight pool was pretty small.
Yeah.
But basically, at that time, I earned, over the betting period detailed in the book, I increased my wallet size by 544%. Okay, so the system was, certainly successful at being able to recognize what was a good trifecta, and it did it often enough that we were able to, clear a reasonable profit on this. That was kind of where the money kind of went. The staking, the amount that we actually bet on a match, depended upon how much other people were betting. Again, this was kind of the thing in a pari-mutuel system. If you are betting a lot of money and nobody else is betting, all you are doing is, if nobody else was betting at a horse race and all you did, you were the only one that bet, what would happen? The house would take 20% of that money, put it in its pocket, take the 80% and give it to the winner. Well, if you're too big a part of the pool, you're basically betting against yourself. And one of the things that was unfortunate, again, is, over the time we ran the project, this highlight became, gradually less popular. The betting pools went down. It saw fewer opportunities that were profitable to bet. Okay, but basically knowing roughly what the size of the pool was. If the pool was very small, we really needed to have, bets that we felt really good about, okay, in order to know that we were not really betting against ourselves.
So your staking must have been quite inconsistent then, and did that affect your results? I mean, sometimes you might be putting down hundreds of dollars, maybe sometimes just tens of dollars. I'm just guessing. But I assume if you get to situations where the tens of dollars ones are winning and the hundreds are losing, did you get some real inconsistent results?
Yes, so there was, we again, if you, in the book, there's the graph of how we do. And, again, there were presumably certain days it felt better about betting than other days. Okay, so there was a difference in how much we bet each day. But the other thing, of course, is that we were betting on relatively rare events. We had to pick who was going to win, finish first, second, and third. There were 336 different possibilities in each match. So the actual, even if we had one that was, expected value was good, we could often go a relatively long time between wins. So when we hit one of these, we would earn a lot of money, but but we were betting on relatively rare events. And so you're right. So the graph would go up and down, up and down. And, there's times when you see it going down, you feel nervous. Oh my God, did the system break? But then, eventually you hit another trifecta and we jumped up again.
Yeah. What were the limits like though? Like, were you able to get thousands down on a match? I mean, it is
We were
quite a
not
niche
getting
market.
thousands down on a match. Again, this was not high. This was not big money. Okay,
Yeah,
I hate
yeah,
to tell you this. This is one reason why it was a lot easier to write a book about the system and give it up than if it was big money.
yeah.
But
Okay.
we were probably betting, I would say, on an average day, probably probably about $100 a day at our in steady state, and many of these were on relatively low probability events, so it would kind of go up and down, based on that. But no, so this was not life changing money that was being bet here. Okay, this was proof of concept money, and we certainly proved it. I made enough. I was able to, again, because university faculty are not supposed to run bookmaking operations out of their office. The money was eventually donated to charity that we won. And I got to tell my story in the book, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the ultimate real reward.
Yeah, would you say that you guys were, although you said you're only able to get 100 down, but I mean that's because the limits were so low. Would you say you guys were controlling the highlight market in a way?
We were not controlling the highlight market, but we were big enough that we knew we were making at least a little dent in it. Okay, the betting pools were probably, when it came to betting on one of these trifectas or these combinations, we would in fact actually end up usually betting on something called a trifecta box. They had a special bet where you could, instead of betting, I think it was $3 for a trifecta, you could bet something like $12 for all the different permutations, the 6 different permutations of 3 teams, which meant that you were buying these teams, these tickets at essentially half price.
Hmm.
And although you had to buy the ones that were governed by the same 3 teams. And so one of the things our model would look for were box bets, okay, good. And box bets would mean that we would have less down on any given combination, which was good because it minimized our pool impact. Okay, so yeah, so we were quite conscious of whether or not we were a affecting the size of the pool. One consequence about pari-mutuel wagering, though, that's different than certain other kinds of things. If I was going into a casino, if I had a computer and I bring my computer to a casino and start using it to tell me how to bet on roulette, they will immediately throw me out of the casino. They don't want to see me win. When you're betting in a pari-mutuel system, you're betting basically against the other bettors, and the house is getting a cut of everything you bet. So no one was particularly concerned. They were perfectly happy that I was betting and winning. Okay, but but again, ultimately, I was trying to take it from the other bettors, and there had to be enough bettors there to make something worth taking.
Yeah, and I want you to delve maybe a bit deeper into how you actually automatically phoned in those bets. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but can you explain again just how exactly that worked? Because I think it's quite fascinating.
So this was, again, I don't know how old the audience is. You guys, by now, everybody has an internet connection. Everybody has it coming in through typically probably either the cable or their phone line. Okay, so it actually, but you don't really see it through your phone line. It's kind of automatically kind of plugged into a mobile router, in the back of a mobile router. That's the connection to the wall. In the early days of the internet, if you wanted to get on a computer remotely, you used a dial-in modem. And originally, these things were these wonderful things that would take a phone, and that they had these cups, these acoustic couplers that would run around this thing, and they would send touch tones to kind of program the dialing system of the phone company, and then send data back and forth by making chirp noise and listening to that. And that was how the data flew back and forth between your computer, was through these phone lines. Well, the Connecticut system, their auto system was one of these dial response systems where, you know, you call up and you're supposed to push dials, okay? You know, you would call them up and they would say, okay, what's your account number? And you'd have to type in your account number on the phone. And then what's your, what do you want to, what race do you want to bet on? And you type in, well, I want to bet on the 5th race. What combination? Well, I want to bet on horse 3, 2, and 1. Okay. So you had to enter your bets by actually typing things on a phone. And this would have been incredibly tedious.
Okay.
So instead, what did we do? We took one of these modem devices and we programmed them. One of the things they had to be able to do was to call out in order to make a connection. So we programmed one of these devices to pretend it was a person doing the dialing. And we had kind of had to build something that would kind of synchronize between what the, you know, when the Connecticut system was expecting somebody to say something, you know, type something in, and what we wanted to type. And so it was a little, you know, it was, you know, kind of an art back and forth because we weren't really listening to them. Okay. We were kind of doing this all from timing, but, and it sometimes we lost bets and sometimes we lost bets we were going to win, but, you know, they did that. They weren't made properly because the, our system got out of sync with their, auto tote, but we got enough bets in that, we were able to run this autonomously. And it really became kind of like a program trading system. And it was fun to watch. I'd get an email in the morning telling me what we had bet on and, you know, how we had done. And, you know, it was fun to watch.
Oh, it's awesome. Was it, at that time, was it kind of groundbreaking technology?
I would say groundbreaking. I'm hesitating to say, but I'd say it was a good hack. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's still a fun story to tell because, you know, it required, you know, surmounting a bunch of hurdles and using a piece of technology not in the way that it was supposed to be used. So that was actually quite appealing, and it was a fun project. And again, I still am. You know, again, I'm a computer scientist. I'm still interested in modeling. You know, we do a lot of work on machine learning in my research lab. I'm interested in you know, in gambling as you know, as a good example of what probabilities of what modeling can do. So yeah, like last year we wrote a little paper on lottery systems and when you would expect is a good, when there's a lottery, how much money needs to be in a lottery pool before it becomes a profitable, you know, the expected value of betting on that lottery is positive. So yeah, so I'm, you know, gambling is an interesting thing. And, you know, this was a, you know, our fun foray into it.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. Have you tried, obviously your model wouldn't work in other sports, but have you tried just, you know, creating a whole new model because of your experience with highlight on any other sports?
You know, we have occasionally, you know, I would say we futzed with things a little bit, not seriously, not the way that we had tried to do this, but, you know, occasionally as student projects, we've thought about trying to do something with football. Okay. Or, you know, at one point even a little bit on horse racing, but we never really have done something serious. The highlight system was something I'm proud of. That was something that was seen through to completion, and I think the tail is actually quite interesting. So so again, I will flash this up to you for all your viewers. Okay, it's a good story. It's a fun story, and it'll give you an idea of really how you go about building models that you know, can determine the expected value of a wager, even in terms of uncertainty about the pool size and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you know how we did it, and you know what it meant and stuff like that.
Can you think of any sports nowadays where you think you could create a model where there are obviously, like as you were saying, highlight doesn't really have the greatest limits? Are there, so that, I mean, not having great limits is also good because it means the system is probably a bit more exploitable because there's not as many people betting and not as much information. Is there any sports you can think of nowadays? That probably ones that maybe people have never heard
Well,
of.
first of all, the best place, if you're really determined to, let's say bet on a market which has big limits and, you can trade rel. This is what stock markets are for. This is why hedge funds exist. So, if this is really the kind of thing that you're interested in, my encouragement is you study computer science, you study math, and then go get a job at a hedge fund. Okay, that would be my first advice. Okay, because these are where the pools are large enough that you can do big things, and they're interesting. Now with sports, again, it's the question of how big a pool is depends. This changes with time, and the question, I guess, what I would be thinking a little bit is in worlds of internet gambling. Okay, as in the United States historically, you have not been able to bet across state lines. Without it being basically a federal crime. The Connecticut had an agreement with New York. That's why I was safe to have my phone dial into Connecticut for the auto tote at that time. Now there seems to be a trend towards possibly relaxing some of these restrictions. Okay, I'm not quite sure I know the state of the art right now. But I think if there was large scale betting on on elections would be an interesting thing. If there was large scale betting on systematized in a way that you could really trade it on sports like American football, I think this is interesting. But what I will say is that the most profitable things are probably the more confusing, the more complicated bets. So something like if I had access to betting on large pools, like one of these bets we have to get get the winner of 10 matches, okay? Where you were betting not on a simple what is one match going to happen, but maybe where you had to include over-unders and point. So for certain kind of complicated pool bets, that might be an interesting thing, okay? Because that's one where the more complicated the betting situation is, involving more matches and things like that, the harder it is for people to try to really judge what the probabilities are. And that would probably argue that that if they're not as good at judging it, they probably are, there are probably ways to bet against them that might exploit that.
Yeah, interesting. And just to finish up, mate, do you have much of a role in gambling or the gambling industry nowadays? I know you mentioned a little bit with your, tinkering around with student projects and looking at modeling football and stuff like that. Is there any involvement at all?
No, I would say at this point, I won't say I've gone straight, but at this moment, I don't have any real gambling projects online. Although, of course, I'm always if the right thing were to walk in the door, this would be very interesting. And it is obviously a challenge to try to build a system you're going to try to be smarter than somebody else. And betting money is a good way of keeping score. Okay, so of knowing whether you're really successful or not. So so I do, if the right question came in the door, I would be interested in talking about it and thinking about it. But at this moment, I don't have any active gambling projects at this moment.
No, awesome, mate. Cool. All right, just to finish up, do you want to just tell listeners where they can find you and your book and whatever projects you're working on nowadays?
I'm a professor at Stony Brook University. I'm on the web if you need to look me up. Again, my book is on, be able to buy it. It's from Cambridge University Press. It's Calculated Bets, Computers, Gambling, and Mathematical Modeling to Win. And you can certainly get it on Amazon. and along with my other books. And so I encourage you to take a look at that, and it may give you a different perspective on how you model things and how you make intelligent wagers.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure having you on, mate. Very, very interesting stuff. Obviously, something we've never ever talked about on the podcast before. Yeah, I guess to have a good spin up, which was yeah, lots of fun, mate. So
Okay,
thanks for coming on.
This has been fun. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having me.
No worries, guys. Next podcast coming out for everyone. We'll be looking at the EPL again with Haru and George for the upcoming round. But other than that, thanks for listening. Make sure you do a quick rate and review of the podcast and subscribe to us wherever you listen. And if you're looking to implement some of the strategies we talked about today, maybe not some of the highlight ones, but more so the value betting ones, make sure you start a free week trial of Trademate Sports. Cheers again, Stephen, and catch up soon.
Thank you very much.
See you guys. All right.